Okay, now we're going to cover visual scanning and collision avoidance, and what that is, and the objective of that is to make sure that we have a firm understanding and a methodology that we can use to avoid mid-air collisions with other aircraft. And the reason that that's important, obviously, is because people typically don't survive mid-air collisions, and it's a huge threat to safety and very hazardous. So if we have a proper methodology, and we understand when we're most at risk, we can certainly mitigate that risk substantially. And a couple of things that we want to consider about how much of a challenge that we face is if two aircraft are converging and headed on a collision course with one another, doing approximately 350 miles an hour each, from a mile out, there's a little bit less than 10 seconds to react. And if we put ourselves in jet airliners on a collision course at 600 miles an hour, we've got less than 5 seconds to react from a mile away. So that is a very scary thought. The FAA has also determined through their studies that on average it takes about 12 and a half seconds for a pilot to spot some other traffic, determine that he's on a collision course with that traffic, and take the appropriate deviation to prevent the collision. So it's imperative that we're able to spot traffic as soon as possible, and we do that with a thorough understanding of proper collision or proper scanning procedures. And so we'll talk in depth about that here in just a second. And some things that we're going to cover as a general overview. If we look through the PTS, it would like us to discuss the relationship between a pilot's health and physical condition and vision. Also, it would like us to understand the eye, some of its limitations, and also some illusions and things that are some weaknesses within the eye. Environmental conditions that can cause the eye not to be as effective, our visual scanning methods not to be effective. And there's a concept called the see and avoid concept, which is discussed in the Federal Aviation Regulation. What is our responsibility with Part 91 of the Federal Aviation Regulation in regards to that? Also, what is our proper visual scan? And if we do have an improper visual scan, what does that do to our level of risk as far as a collision? Also, where are our blind spots in our eye and on the aircraft? And what kind of clearing procedures can we use in order to help extend the range of our visual scan? And then finally, what situations put us in the greatest risk for collision potential? So we'll cover those areas and situations that we face. Okay, let's talk about physical health and vision, things that could actually affect our vision that we might not be aware of. Some of those things would be improper diet, not enough rest, so stress and fatigue, vitamin deficiencies. Certain vitamins like vitamins A and C have been shown to be important for proper vision. Alcohol, smoking, hypoxia, and carbon monoxide poisoning. All those things can reduce our ability to see, especially at night. Okay, some environmental factors that reduce our vision. The first thing would be dim lighting. Anytime we're in a dim light situation, things with small print or colors can become impossible to read. So things like an AFD inside the cockpit or our aeronautical charts could be pretty much useless under those circumstances. Darkness, so nighttime flying, that's an environmental consideration that we have to give. At night, our vision becomes much more sensitive to light. That's because our night vision operates off of rods. Our eyes consist of rods and cones. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to blind spots and whatnot. But those rods are 10,000 times more sensitive to light. And so to properly prepare our eyes for nighttime flying, we need exposure to darkness for 30 minutes to get the complete night vision that's available to us through our own biology. So we need about 30 minutes. Okay. Now, that night vision can actually be impaired by a few things. Cabin pressure altitudes above 5,000 feet. We have reduced ability to be able to see. Any carbon monoxide inhalation due to smoking or other factors that could cause that reduces it. Improper diet, like a vitamin A deficiency, also hinders that, or any kind of prolonged exposure to bright sunlight. Now, if our eyes have adjusted to the darkness and we get in a situation where we do have to turn on a light, we will lose the night vision that we've acquired over that course of the 30 minutes or whatnot. So it's important when we're inside a cockpit to make sure that if we do have to turn on a bright white light, to cover one eye, and so that we at least retain part of our night vision. Some other ones would be excessive illumination, like any kind of light reflected off of the canopy of the aircraft, surfaces inside the aircraft, clouds, water. Those things that glare causes us to squint our eyes and reduces our visual field, causing it harder for us to make our scans. We've got things like environmental things like smoke, haze, rain, dust, and those are other factors that reduce our visibility. Okay. Another one is called, and this is actually could be our fault even. It's called empty field myopia, and empty field myopia is basically induced nearsightedness. When we're in poor visibility conditions and don't have a reference point, we have a tendency to be nearsighted where we don't look far enough in front of the aircraft because we don't have anything to focus on outside of us. So vigilance is required with us making our scans, because otherwise things could be very close to us, but because we're basically just staring off into space, we're not going to be able to see them. Okay. Now, one of the best ways to prevent the empty field myopia is to search out things to look for out beyond the aircraft, even when there's not much available to us. So, no matter how dim, that's going to help us. Now let's talk about visual and vestibular illusions that we face. First thing is we'll cover the two different types, a little bit about the systems, and then when we explain each of the illusions, we're going to talk about the reason the illusion occurs, what the illusion is, and what the typical results are as far as the pilot's actions. The first thing is the vestibular system, which consists of two different types of organs. These types of organs are located in the middle ear, in the inner ear, and these are circular canals that are filled with a fluid called indolent fluid. And these particular circular canals, there's 3 of them in each ear, and they're set at right angles to each other. And what they do is they measure pitch, roll, and yaw, how we perceive that, okay? Kind of almost like an instrument in the aircraft. And the way that they work is the indolent fluid gets set in motion in the canal. And as you can see down here, these are little hairs. And if that indolent fluid was to make a motion around in that direction through that canal, it would stimulate those hairs to travel in a certain direction, and we would feel the sensation of being in a turn. And that's how that works. Now, this particular organ, it's only good for about 20 seconds. After that, the speed of the fluid somehow does something, and from that, it just does. I'm not hot on that one. These other organs are a little bit easier. These are called otolith organs, and these organs are located in the same general region, and there's two parts to them. And when we're in a normal, these organs are designed to detect any kind of acceleration, feelings of acceleration, and also feelings of gravity, pitching also, so to speak. So we can run into some problems with this because in a pitch-up situation, the movement of the organs feels the same as an acceleration situation. So that can actually lead to some kind of issues. So let's talk about a couple of these. The first one that we'll bring up are the leans. And the reason that we get the leans is because we might inadvertently enter a turn. If we're in IMC and have no visual reference to the ground, we're pretty much going to be relying on the vestibular system and the somato system. What happens is we get into a turn inadvertently. So the aircraft is banked and no visual reference to the ground. And we don't realize that we're in a turn because those inner ear organs haven't been stimulated. So somehow the turn is abruptly stopped. And we feel as if we are in a turn in the opposite direction, even though we're not. So what we do is we put the aircraft back in the attitude that it was at, because our false sensations have led us to believe that this is a level pitch attitude or a level flight attitude when it's not. So that's the leans, and that's the actual illusion itself. It feels like we're banking in the opposite direction, and typically the pilot's going to roll the aircraft back into this position, and it could be very dangerous because we feel as if we're straight and level when we're not. And I think everybody's probably experienced that one after a little bit of instrument flight. We've got a Coriolis illusion, and Coriolis illusion, we've gone into a turn, okay, and the sensation of feeling like we're in the turn has stopped. We make an abrupt head movement, and what that does is, of course, those canals that have the fluid in them, there's a motion in an entirely different direction. So we had been in a turn long enough to kind of feel as if we were level, and then we set, by moving our head, we're experiencing sensation in a different direction. So we could feel as if we were pitching up, pitching down, rolling, or yawing inside the aircraft. And the result of that is we could make incorrect or abrupt actions and put ourselves in a pretty sticky situation. And this we'll talk about a graveyard spiral. And a graveyard spiral is basically we've been in a constant rate turn for quite some time in our aircraft, constant rate turn. We've lost that sensation of turning because the organ only works for about 20 seconds, and we've somehow perceived that we're at a level flight attitude throughout the turn. And what happens is when we're in a turn and we're not applying appropriate elevator back pressure to take into account the loss of the vertical component of lift, we might not pull back on that elevator in that turn, and we're going to lose altitude. Well, we feel like we're flying level. However, what we're doing is we're pulling back at an attitude like this, and we're just going to tighten that turn, and we're going to increase that rate of descent, and we're going to keep doing it until we end up in a very tight spiral. The spiral might start like this, and then this, and then this, because we continue to pull back as we lose the altitude. And that's a graveyard spiral. Very dangerous. Somatogravic illusion, the somatogravic system, or the somato whatever it is system. Talk about that real quick. That was the organs that we had, or rather, that's how our skin, our joints, our muscles, and our nerves react to tell our brain what's actually happening. So when we accelerate and we get pushed back in the seat, that's interpreted in our brain by our somatogravic system. So in a rapid acceleration, it will feel like we're in a nose-up attitude. In a rapid deceleration, it might feel like we're in a nose-down attitude. And typically, what we're going to do is if we feel like we're in a nose-up attitude, we'll push the nose down. We might already be at a level flight attitude, and that could be dangerous, and vice versa with a deceleration. An inversion illusion, so if we change, an abrupt change from a climb to straight and level flight, at that point it's going to give a sensation that we're tumbling backwards. And if we push the nose down because we feel as if we're tumbling backwards, we're going to aggravate the condition even more. The next is the elevator illusion. Elevators go up and down, and for example, an updraft or a downdraft, where we would go up or down like this, can also give us the illusion of a climb or a descent. And so if we experience an updraft and the aircraft goes up, we feel like we're in a climb, we might push the nose down and put ourselves in an unfriendly attitude. Now a couple of the visual illusions right now. Let's talk about a false horizon for just a second. So we might encounter, without any kind of visual reference to the ground, we might encounter a cloud in our aircraft that looks something like this. An upsloping cloud. We can't see the horizon, but our horizon, let's say it was right here. Rather than aligning ourselves to that plane of the horizon, we align the aircraft to the cloud. Assuming, we're assuming that the cloud is aligned with the horizon when it's not. So that's one with a false horizon. Any kind of at night, any kind of light pattern on the ground, we could align also. So if we were flying along and we looked out our windscreen, and we had some ground lights that were at varying distances, such as this. Our body seeking symmetry. See these lights here? Our body seeking symmetry might cause us to align the aircraft with those lights, and so we don't have any solid visual reference to the horizon, that would be the actual horizon. Autokinesis. What happens in autokinesis is when it's dark outside, if we tend to fixate upon a light, it may appear that light is moving after we stare at it for a little while, and we might feel that we're at a collision risk, and we might put the aircraft in a unintended or dangerous attitude to avoid the false collision risk. Some of the landing illusions that we have. The first landing illusion would be a runway width illusion. When we approach narrow runways, sometimes it can give us the illusion that we are higher than we actually are, and that causes us to fly a lower approach, and vice versa with a wider runway. We have runways that slope, a runway that has an upslope to it, or terrain nearby that has an upslope to it, will also make us feel as if we are higher than we are, and it will cause us to fly a lower approach. And vice versa for a runway with a downslope or downsloping terrain that's nearby. We also have featureless terrain, so if there's no ground features on the ground, if there's snow, if we're coming in over water, if there's no lights. It tends to create the illusion that we're higher than we actually are and causes us to fly a low approach. And all these low approaches just put us at risk, to strike objects and things on the ground. There's a couple of atmospheric illusions, rain on the windscreen, haze and fog, and rain on the windscreen, and causes us to feel as if we're higher than we actually are, because the refraction properties of the water on the windscreen causing us to fly a lower approach. The haze makes us feel like we are at a further distance than we actually are, and that will also cause us to feel as if we're high, so we'll fly a lower approach. And fog actually can create the sensation or create the visual illusion that we're pitching up, so we might pitch down and put the aircraft in a dangerous attitude. There's a few with ground lights as well. Lights along a straight path, along a road, even a train. They can create an illusion of a runway, and we can end up landing or trying to land somewhere that is not an airport. And finally, bright runway and approach light system. If they're really bright, it might make us feel that we're closer than we are, or create the illusion. We'll feel as if we're higher than we're supposed to be, and we'll fly a lower approach than we intend. See and avoid concept in right-of-way is discussed in FAR 91-113, and what it basically tells us is that in IMC or VMC flight, it is primarily the responsibility of the pilot for traffic and collision avoidance, and so it's spelled out for us there. Some of the right-of-way stuff that we need to keep in mind. For example, let's say two aircraft are headed at each other head on. As such, well, 91-213 says each aircraft shall alter course to the right if they're at approximately the same altitude. Now let's talk about converging aircraft of the same category. So if I was in my aircraft, I'm looking out my windscreen, and I see another aircraft, and he's approximately the same altitude as me, and I can typically determine that by his position on the horizon. If he's about on the horizon, that means he's at approximately the same altitude as me, and we're not headed head on, we're converging. So we're coming in to the same point. There would still be a collision, but we're coming in at an angle. So that aircraft will look like this, and a level flight altitude, but we're converging on the same point. He's going to have the right of way. The aircraft on your right, you have the right of way. If he's on your left, then you have the right of way. So I would need to alter my course to avoid the collision. It would be my responsibility. A couple other things to keep in mind. If, for example, I was overtaking this guy, taking him from behind, and that's what his tail looks like from behind me, or I'm behind him. He has the right of way, and if I want to overtake this aircraft, I need to pass to the right and well clear. Okay? So if aircraft are converging and they're of a different category, for example, I'm in my airplane, and I've got a hot air balloon. We're headed for the same place. Okay? The hot air balloon's always going to have the right of way. Okay? After the hot air balloon, a glider has the right of way, and then an airship. Now, the only exception to this is anytime an aircraft is in distress, they always have the right of way. Also, aircraft towing other aircraft or aircraft refueling other aircraft they also have right of way over everything except for a distressed aircraft. Okay. And the last thing is landing, and the way landing works is if two aircraft are approximately the same distance from an airport, they're both going in for landing. The aircraft that is lower has the right of way, but we cannot take use or take advantage of this rule and try and get lower than the other aircraft to get the right of way and get in and land first. Proper visual scanning techniques. We want to scan the entire field of vision that we have, and we want to do that also by not only taking a look at the entire visual field in front of us, but also using regularly spaced patterns of no more than 10 degrees for 1 second. And the reason that we do that is because in the back of the eye there is a part of the eye called the fovea, and the fovea is what allows us to get the clearest, sharpest picture to the brain, and it's a very small portion of the eye. So if we look at something at a distance and we want to be able to see it, we're using the fovea. And any other visual detail that we get that's off dead center during the daytime, of course, is going to have less detail. So like I said, we use those short-spaced eye movements. Some examples of a couple of those movements of the eyes would be as follows. Here's the cockpit of the aircraft. I would make short 10-degree spaced eye movements that would last for 1 second. That's one way to do it. In one direction, like that. The other way to do it is I could scan in one direction at my 10-degree offsets, and then come back to center and scan in the other direction. So those are two methods for visual scanning procedures. Peripheral vision is important to keep in mind. It can be very useful in spotting collision threats. Our peripheral vision, which is our off-center viewing, is important, especially for night, because of the structure of our eyes, the way our eyes are designed. Our eyes function with two different sets of receptors called rods and cones. If that was our eye. The rods are used at night, and they're 10,000 times more light sensitive. The rods are actually located off center as where the cones are dead on. So that's why at night off center viewing, so we can make the same scan that we made earlier. However, our main focus is going to come out of the sides of our eyes to utilize the rods. And one thing I want to add to that is if we do see another aircraft on the horizon and there appears to be no relative movement between the two of us, there's a good chance we're on a collision course. And there's a specific term for that, and that's called the Blossom effect, where objects at a distance appear stationary, but they're going to suddenly bloom into a huge mass once they get close. And that's just one thing I wanted to add to that. Poor visual scanning leads to accidents. If we're spending more time inside the aircraft than outside the aircraft, we're not doing our job. We should be scanning outside, and whether we're on a VFR or an IFR flight plan, if we have the visual conditions, we need to be outside of the aircraft 80% of the time conducting our scan and 20% inside the aircraft. So if we're distracted, if we're looking down, if we're unnecessarily going through checklists, just assuming that there's nobody else out there, especially if we're in proximity of one of the types of areas that we'll discuss that are hazard areas, it can cause us to be cause accidents. So that proper visual scanning is of the utmost importance. Keeping the eyes outside the aircraft. Okay, talk a little bit about proper clearing procedures. Clearing procedures begin when we're on the ground. When we go to enter a runway, the runway environment, or prior to entering the runway environment, we want to make sure that we have a good visual line of sight to the approach end of that runway. And in a high-wing aircraft, that might require us to not pull in to the hold short area perpendicular to the runway. So, for example, if the runway we pulled up to and we saw our hold short line was right there, rather than align our aircraft with that hold short line, our wing right there, our wing is going to get in the way and obstruct our view down the approach path. So we might actually pull our aircraft in so that our eyes can be down the approach end of that runway. And that's one of the first ones that we need to keep in mind. Whenever we're climbing or descending, it's a good idea to make very gentle S-turns to allow us to scan a larger sector of the sky. Straight and level flight, we're going to use our visual scan, where we're going to just take a look at the different sectors of the sky as we previously discussed. Traffic patterns. When we enter a traffic pattern, we want to enter the traffic pattern at the traffic pattern altitude. We don't want to descend into the traffic pattern altitude because that can cause a collision for aircraft that are below us that we might not have noticed. So it's a lot better for us because those aircraft should be at a traffic pattern altitude as well. We won't fly down on top of them. When we are doing our training operations, our maneuvers, we want to make sure that we do a clearing turn of either 180 degrees or 2 consecutive 90-degree turns. It's best to do those to the left. We'll do those to clear the area before we do our maneuvers so that we have a good idea of who's up there with us. We've got a couple of blind spots in the aircraft. The wing struts can be blind spots, and in a high-wing aircraft, when we look out, that wing is going to cover up a pretty good a bit of where we could be looking. So if we're going to make a turn, our wing is going to kind of cover what we're able to see. So we need to actually lift that wing before we make a turn and check for some traffic. And it can even be the same with a low-wing aircraft, because we might have aircraft below us. So we can momentarily, before starting the turn, enter a little bit of a bank and kind of get an idea of who's out there with us. The aircraft speed differential and collision risk. Assume for a second that we were in a jet and we were headed towards a collision with a mountainside at 600 miles an hour. It's not going to give us a whole lot of time to react if we're 2 miles away. We might only have less than 15 seconds to react. Now, we can magnify that, a speed differential. If another aircraft is approaching us at the same speed, it kind of relates to us approaching that mountain at 1,200 miles an hour, so it cuts our time to react in half. And they say that, and something I covered earlier, I'll hit on it again, but the average pilot only has 12.5 seconds to spot the traffic, to determine if there's a collision course between the two aircraft and take the appropriate actions necessary. So it's certainly important that we spot our traffic from a good way. So the last thing we're going to talk about this is situations that involve the greatest collision risk. And some NTSB statistics show that most of these happen in VFR conditions and daylight on the weekend. Most of the ones that happen at less than 3,000 feet AGL are at uncontrolled airports within 10 nautical miles. The rest of them happen to be at less than 8,000 feet within 25 nautical miles of controlled airports. Usually happens to, it can happen to pilots of all skill levels, fun, pleasurable flights in good weather conditions, usually within 10 miles of non-towered airports. A lot of times it happens in the transition to and from the traffic pattern, and that's part of the reason that they have us enter the traffic pattern from a 45-degree angle, so we have optimal visual scanning on a downwind leg. Turning base can also be or base to final can also be a tough area. Usually when we turn base, we not only want to be focusing straight ahead or making our wind correction, we also want to be looking down the extended approach path of that runway out for a few miles doing our visual scan. And a couple other areas, airways, especially near VORs. People navigate to VORs, so it's definitely a convergence point, closer to the VOR especially. Around our airports and VFR corridors through Class Bravo, Charlie, Delta, any kind of controlled airspace especially, are places where we need to be on any more alert. And so that's pretty much it for this. Bam.